The Western Cape government has lambasted the increase, with the DAMMP for Community Safety, Gillion Bosman, saying that the senior members at SAPS would be called to account for the results. We are now joined by Western Cape MEC for Community Safety, Reagan Allen. MEC, good morning. Thank you so much for making time for us. Last year, when we were speaking about the second quarter or the last quarter stats, which showed that there was an extreme decline in the Western Cape, 14.1%, compared to the previous period, and 27.2% decrease in murder in the stats in the Western Cape. What has happened, MEC, since then?
Aldrin, thank you so much for bringing us into this difficult conversation. You are quite correct. We have seen decreases, and to see now an increase of 8.6% is deeply distressing. It is where we have consistently, Aldrin, called for skewed allocations to be addressed. We have consistently called to ensure that we have visible policing in our hotspot areas, and that is where we have stepped up, Aldrin, with our LEAP program, where we place those LEAP officers in our murder hotspots. And on the one hand, to see increases in some of our priority areas, like I've said, it's deeply disheartening. On the other hand, we see decreases in Delft, which in the previous quarter was the murder capital of our country, that now saw a 20% reduction. We saw reductions in Mitchell's Plain, Shamora Machel, together with Kraaifontein, and we know that we can basically turn the tide should policing powers be devolved to a provincial government. Aldrin, I'm currently sitting in Pretoria, and choices are made here in Pretoria that affects residents in Mfuleni, in Khayelitsha, and in the Western Cape. We are saying consistently that we are needing to devolve policing powers closer to the people. The Constitution allows for it, so that we can ultimately arrest the tide and that we have seen where these increases just continue across our country.
Yeah. Well, last year, the Democratic Alliance, and I guess yourself as well, MEC, was saying that the Law Enforcement Advancing Plan, the LEAP program, has resulted in that decline that I was speaking about. Let me just quickly remind our viewers what I said. It's 14.1% year-on-year decrease, and a 27.2% decrease in murder since the release of the last crime statistics. This was last year, and the LEAP program was praised and credited for this reduction. But what has happened since?
We have seen in our priority areas, and where we have shifted our lead officers to ensure that we can see those reductions in areas like Mfuleni and in Delft, the increases is deeply concerning. In our analysis, Aldrin, we can confirm that we are currently 9,000 police officers short. So the Western Cape government has stepped up. But we know, in terms of the actual mandate to combat, to prevent, and to investigate crime, is a SAPS competency. Hence, I'm always wanting to see that our oversight that we have currently can lead to better service delivery. And these are conversations, difficult conversations, that we have had with the National Minister, with the Provincial Commissioner, and SAPS members in the Western Cape, to ensure that we can ultimately create a safer Western Cape. But to specifically answer two particular angles to that question, Aldrin, during the April to September analysis of parolees that was released into the Western Cape, we have seen that out of that particular figure, there was 113 that reoffended for matters like murder, rape, and gender-based violence. We have also seen where there has been an escalation in gang violence, gang violence as well, which has created some instability in our priority areas. And we have spoken about the anti-gang unit for so many years. I've always been consistent that we are needing to properly capacitate the anti-gang unit to have a clear mandate, so that we can not only disrupt criminal elements and criminal activities, but ultimately use the Prevention of Organised Crime Act to bring these perpetrators to book, so that they can ultimately be land where they belong. But those are two elements that we have seen in our analysis that contributed in the last quarter now, where we are seeing these increases.
Yeah. Okay. And then let's look at the most dangerous areas according to these stats that have been released. Cape Town, or areas or towns in Cape Town, form part of the top 10. And out of the top 10, you have 6 that are in Cape Town, which is the majority. but also looking at the demographic profile of these areas, Mfuleni, Guguletu, Nyanga, Khayelitsha, Harare as well, and Harare as well as Delft. What is it about these particular areas that have contributed to the high rates of murders that we've seen in the province, that have obviously leaped the province to become one of the murder capitals in the country?
Eldrin, I firstly want to appreciate this particular question because it highlights the skewed allocations. I can confirm the areas that you have highlighted now has skewed allocations. What that means is that it has one officer for every 800 residents. In an area like Khayelitsha, the figure is one officer for every 1,100 officers. Residents. So we have seen in those particular areas like Mfuleni, it has basically doubled its size in population. And when we talk about the deployment of SAPS officers where they are needed based on data and evidence, and that is what we do in the LEAP program, we place them in those areas as well. But when we address it with the South African Police Service to ensure that those members can actually be increased in those particular areas, so that we can not only create proper visibility, but have an evidence-based and a data-led approach so that we address the need where it is the greatest. And if I take you to an area like Claremont, for example, there we will have one officer for every 530 residents, which is the provincial average of one officer for every 550 residents. So in essence, Aldred, our allocations across our province from the South African Police Service, we have seen that in our priority areas, the allocations is almost double that of the provincial average. And in our view, in the view of many, in terms of our engagements with CPFs, with neighborhood watchers, and with other stakeholders, that is an issue that needs to be addressed. And should a DA-led Western Cape government be afforded the policing powers, it's something that we can immediately implement so that we can ultimately see that there is a reduction in those particular areas as well.
Yep. What has happened since the Khayelitsha Commission of Inquiry and its recommendations? And again, going back to the stats, Khayelitsha, October to December 2022, had around 40 deaths. That increased to 70 in 2023. It nearly doubled.
The Khayelitsha Commission of Inquiry indicated even in 2014 the Western Cape government's commitment towards policing. And that particular commission was instituted by the previous premier, ultimately to ensure that there is better cooperation between the South African Police Service and members of the community, in my estimation. And when I did an analysis just 2 weeks ago, there was 21 recommendations. Elton, sadly, there is currently 16 recommendations that was placed in front of the South African Police Service that have not been met, and some have been partially met. For example, the one additional station that needed to be erected in an area of Makaza. Only last year, the short turning happened for the police station in Harare, and Harare is part of the Khayelitsha community. So it's definitely in terms of those recommendations, which has hardly been taken into account. And when I speak, and just last night I spoke to the National Minister again, and I indicated to him, I'm deeply concerned that we have 6 of our stations in the top 10. And I again echo the sentiments that we are needing to ensure that we ultimately can have proper policing in those areas, because we are 20 years behind. 20 years behind in terms of the actual amount of officers that we need. Here in the Western Cape, we've been very clear that yes, there is a violence prevention leg and there's a law enforcement leg to our safety plan, looking at the root causes of crime, but also the law enforcement, the policing role, and that is what we are striving for.
Yeah. But what's your analysis, MEC, telling you about why it is that these stations, which are in the top 10, these 6 stations, why do you have so much violence playing out in these areas compared to the more affluent areas in the Western Cape? What is it from your analysis that you've identified that contributes to that?
Aldrin, I would like to highlight 4 key aspects. I've already highlighted the skewed allocations, that in those particular areas, the ratio of SAPS members to the population is wholly unacceptable. I also want to address the socio-economic circumstances in those areas. We are aware that those areas are some of our most poor areas, and we have seen that where there is an influx of additional residents into a community, it does increase the crime rate. Importantly as well, Aldrin, is to mention that in an area like Kayalicha, like Umfuleni, we are needing to ensure that the entire criminal justice system ultimately works. What I mean by that is that when we see that persons commit crimes, they are not held accountable, they're not sentenced in our courts, it emboldens those particular perpetrators to continue to commit these heinous crimes. So we have had all these discussions with the NPA and with correctional services to ensure that the criminal justice system and all of those entities, departments, are led by a national government. Yep. And we have mandated, and the Premier have mandated me to ensure that I can have those engagements with the entire criminal justice system, from justice to the DP, to the NPA, and the correctional services, to ensure that we can actually make sure that these perpetrators are held accountable. There's two deterrents to crime. That's front and center. The one is visible policing. It does act like a deterrent to crime. Another one is if someone is sentenced, Aldrin. Yeah. If someone is sentenced and they know before they commit the crime that they will be caught, they will be brought before court and convicted, that acts as a deterrent. And we are wanting to see those two particular matters actually be scaled up drastically. Okay. I can also confirm and I wouldn't want to miss this last point, Aldrin. In December, we were informed that we are going to get 2,600 additional SAPS members. Aldrin, we have literally counted the new members that arrived in December. It was 1,080. So we are 1,000 short on an amount that was promised to the Western Cape. So we are definitely seeing those under-resourcing playing a huge role in terms of our fight against crime from SAPS. Well, MEC, you're speaking to us from Tshwane, where the DA will be launching its manifesto later on today. What can you tell us about what the DA would be promising when it comes to crime fighting? And would you also look into whether or not we should see more municipal courts, or the implementation of municipal courts where matters can be processed faster? Most definitely. I'm excited to be here. I think many of our residents in the Western Cape, together in South Africa, is fully aware that we have a national government that is consistently failing. We have seen on every metric that the Western Cape is head and shoulders above all other provinces. And if we speak about the crime stats, for example, I can confirm, Aldrin, that between 2019 and 2023, the Western Cape was actually the only province out of the top 4 priority stations that saw a reduction in the murder rate per capita. Last night, I confirmed that with the national minister as well. We saw increases in KZN, we saw increases in Eastern Cape and in Gauteng, whereas the Western Cape saw a 1.4% reduction. We are heading in the right way, but we know we have a long way to go. And we have consistently shown on each and every metric where the DA is in government, we actually outperform other provincial governments across our country. And the offer is very clear that we are needing to ensure that voters ultimately get behind a party that has showed a commitment, that voters get behind a party that has a track record of delivery. We cannot continue in the fashion that we have, where we consistently see, Alvin, that where we have rising unemployment, where we have continued rampant corruption, and when the President ultimately highlights that we have made great progress in terms of the Zondo Commission, but not one particular matter has been brought before court or convicted in that particular way. So we have seen empty promises year on year from a national government, and I sincerely trust that the offer that the DA will put on the table to residents and to voters will be an appealing one, considering that many have felt the brunt of mismanagement and of wasteful expenditure and the brunt of the ANC's leadership in our country.
Thank you so much for your time. That is Reagan Allen, who is the MEC for Community Safety in the Western Cape. Of course, also speaking to us ahead of the DA's election manifesto launch that will be taking place in Tshwane later on today.